Well, our next guest is a big believer that one should become vegetarian not only for one's own health, but also for the good of the environment. Clarence Tan is Vice President of the Vegetarian Society of Singapore, and of course he's been a vegetarian for about 2 decades now. Clarence, just to set the record straight, when you say vegetarian, what does that really mean? I mean, there are different kinds of vegetarians, correct?
Yes, Haslinda, there are. Well, I'm vegan, so I don't take any animal-based foods at all. There are also ovo-lacto vegetarians who don't take meat, but they take dairy and eggs. There's a term called flexitarian, people who are 80–90% vegetarian, but sometimes they eat meat. So different types of vegetarians. I'm vegan, so 100% plant-based food.
Just to play devil's advocate, I mean, is it really better for health? Doesn't it depend on what you eat, whether you're a meat eater or a vegetarian?
Well, think about it. You know, we are really what we eat. Huh? Everybody knows that phrase, but people don't realize how literal it is, right? And, you know, many years ago, I went to a talk, and the speaker was someone called Stephen Acuff. And Stephen Acuff made a very interesting point. He asked the audience, would you put kerosene in your car? And of course, no one in his right mind would do that, because the car was never meant to run with kerosene. If we did that, you wouldn't be very surprised if the car broke down. So this is what we're doing to our bodies. We're putting in something that we're not really designed for. And consequently, we're seeing the rise of a lot of diseases, cancer, heart disease, osteoporosis, diabetes. You know, this is what's happening in the world today.
Clarence, Arjuna here. I mean, doesn't the body surely evolve? I mean, we are, I think, you know, coming into a situation where people are just purely from a convenience standpoint eating more and more meat. I mean, one of the practical considerations, I've tried to be a vegetarian at various instances of my life and found it very difficult because it's simply not available in places like Singapore or Hong Kong. How would you, you know, tackle that problem?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that. In Singapore, I think it's really, really easy to be vegetarian, especially now. We recently, I mean, the Vegetarian Society of Singapore, we recently did a guidebook, and we've got something like 80 over restaurants, vegetarian restaurants in Singapore. And we've got about 400 eateries, meaning food stalls and so that, all around Singapore. So it's really quite easy. And when I can't find a vegetarian restaurant, I go to any normal restaurant and just ask them to produce vegetarian pasta, for example, and all of them can do that. Or just vegetarian fried rice. So it's really not difficult, especially in Singapore.
Isn't it difficult to get a balanced diet, though? I mean, talk about proteins, iron, zinc, calcium. I mean, these are the kind of things that's commonly associated with meat, for instance.
Yeah, there's a huge misconception. Protein is a huge misconception. Now, we recently brought a speaker called Professor Colin Campbell to Singapore to give a few talks. Now, Professor Campbell is a world-renowned researcher, and he's also the author of the bestseller called The China Study. Now, Professor Campbell made 2 very powerful statements. One of them is that animal protein is the most carcinogen, the most potent carcinogen that he knows of, the most potent. And the second statement he made was that a plant-based diet should be seen not just as prevention, but also as treatment and cure for a lot of our diseases today.
So, Clarence, I mean, for a chap like me who, you know, goes home beat at 9 o'clock in the night and opens the refrigerator and, you know, there's a frozen ham or a beef steak in the freezer, but, you know, the vegetable compartment is full of rotten vegetables. How do I sort of make it more practical to, you know, have that quick snack before you go to sleep?
Bananas, fruits, everybody loves fruits, mangoes. You know, it's really not difficult. It's just.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
You know, there's a tongue-in-cheek question here from one of our viewers, and Andy in Houston says, "Do you think, or do you agree that the best way to become vegetarian is to visit a slaughterhouse?"
That's a very good point, Haslinda, because I think Paul McCartney said that if slaughterhouses had glass walls, everybody would be vegetarian. And what he meant was if you saw the horrendous conditions and the kind of torture that is inflicted in factory farms, which is basically where we get all our meat today, you would think twice about eating that piece of steak or that pork.
So that's surely one piece of advice that we all should take if we want to be vegetarian. Arjuna, people like us, meat eaters. Meantime, though, I mean, I'm curious. There's a misconception out there, right, that all vegetarians are animal activists, animal rights activists.
Well, not really. I think we're all concerned because we've been exposed to what happens in factory farms and so on, and it's very natural to be concerned. I think all of us have a natural affinity to kindness. But, you know, there's sort of a veil, right? You go to the supermarket and you get pieces of meat which is cling wrapped, and you don't associate that with the animal from which it came from. You think of it as a piece of, you think of it as dinner. So once again, if you saw the actual conditions that is inflicted upon animals, you would really have second thoughts about it.
I mean, one point which I'd like to raise, Clarence, is, I mean, you mentioned there are lots of vegetarian restaurants in Singapore, for instance, but it's not the case when you when you're traveling. Say, I mean, a lot of us tend to travel in our work, and you end up in a hotel somewhere, and the vegetarian menu is not particularly delectable. They have the usual sort of chef salad, and that's about it. What do you recommend you do in that situation then?
I think the emphasis is on meat reduction. I mean, obviously, we don't expect everybody to become vegetarian overnight, but meat reduction. Because I think the global warming and the environment and the meat consumption aspect is slowly coming to light, and largely because of Dr. Pachauri, who is the head of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. And Dr. Pachauri is urging everyone to cut out meat just once a week to start with. And if you did that, you would still save 170, yes?
Clarence Tan, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you for your insights today.